Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So we've got a provincial election coming up in June of this year, just a month and a bit away. And one of the parties that are running is the None of the Above party. And we're joined tonight by its leader, Greg Vezina. Greg, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
No, I'm fantastic, Brian. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. We want to have all parties on, including the None of the Above party. So tell me, why None of the Above party? Why are you running in this provincial election? And this isn't the first time you've run.
Yeah, okay. I'll try and make a long story short. So fundamentally, we have a law in Ontario and 3 other provinces where you can decline your ballot. You can essentially vote for none of the above. And that is counted separately. And it should count against your campaign subsidies, et cetera, so that if declined ballot does real well, the major parties don't get enough votes to get campaign subsidies. It should mean something, okay? It means we don't like anybody on the ballot. In other countries, however, they have a none of the above on the ballot, and it actually means something. So it's either a political party that's running a candidate, which is elected people, like in Serbia, or it's I refuse to vote for any of these candidates. And in some cases, if none of the above wins, then the election in that riding has to be held over. In other places, the second person wins.
So in other words, instead of just spoiling your ballot, you actually get to vote saying, I don't want any of these guys.
That's right. It counts as a true protest vote. You didn't spoil your ballot because you're too stupid to know how to mark an X, right? You actually, sat down and thought I would vote protest. Now, the problem in Ontario has been that since 2014, although we've had this right since 1975, since 2014 elections, Ontario hasn't told anybody about the right to do it. So the 2018 election, so the 2014 election started, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to try and register a party called None of the Above. And I applied for the name, and they said no. And I said, why? And they said, because it violates the law. And I said, what law? And they said, this law here. And this law here said the only time they can refuse a registration if it's confusing with an existing party. So you couldn't register, I'm a liberal, when there's a liberal. But I said, okay, so show me the registration for None of the Above. Oh, I'm not letting you register. Okay, so I prepared the draft materials and marched off to court and got a hearing date. And 2 minutes before, they said, okay, we'll let you register your party. But that all took so long, I didn't have time to get many candidates. So we ran 8 candidates, and we averaged 1% of the vote in 2014. So 2018 rolls around, we run 42 candidates.
Out of how many
third of the ridings.
How many ridings?
And we average 1% of the vote again. So now we've got over 60 candidates, 64, 65, more than half the ridings. So it started as a frustration with the whole political process. And I've been a member of most major parties and chief agent treasurer of the Greens. I helped Mike Harris become premier. But every time I help someone win office, they get a majority, and then they don't do what they promised. So Mike Harris promised a referenda law. He never did it. Dalton McGuinty promised to support a referendum on PR. He ran against it. Justin Trudeau made the same promise, and he broke it. So I just reached the point where I felt we need to have a mechanism from the outside where people can protest that means something. And so our version of None of the Above, the name is None of the Above Direct Democracy Party, and we're based on direct democracy, not representative politics. We want government like Sweden, not like Canada.
Tell me what direct democracy means to you.
Switzerland, sorry. But direct democracy means the people have a say. There's only 2 countries in the world that use this British parliamentary system. And parties with 30% of the vote can get majorities. And then they can do the exact opposite of everything that they promised in the campaign. And they put their finger in their nose. They go, ah.
Hold it. So you're saying only 2 countries. My understanding is that the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, India all use the system. So tell me where I'm wrong.
Well, okay. The 2 major Western democracies are Canada and the UK. The United States is a 2-party system. It is not the same as a parliamentary system. But there's 90 countries that use some form of proportional representation, which is you get 30% of the vote, you get 30% of the seats. But I don't really care how we elect people, because I don't think they'll do what they promise anyways. I think we need a hammer. And if you look around the world, most countries have a form of referendum or citizen initiative to control their politicians. And if you look at the history of referendums and initiatives, the public is basically right 87% of the time.
87% of the time. How do you calculate that 87%?
Well, if you look at the research, I wrote a book in 1993 called Democracy, and we wrote a bunch of research on this, and the numbers haven't changed, but I'll give you an example. 75% of referendums started by people, especially ordinary people on public interest, pass. Only 25% lose. But only 25% of referendums by special interest, by stop the taxes or by anti-abortion or whatever they are, pass, and half of those are defeated within 10 years. So the public is right 87% of the time every decade. There's never been a politician since Athens that was right half the time. So look at, we can't control the people we elect. We need a say. We just can't go on like we've done for the last hundreds and hundreds of years and let them make decisions without any public input, violate the public interest. Now they're using that notwithstanding clause in the charter to violate the charter to do stuff. Enough is enough, Brian. Canada should show the world what a real democracy is. We should not swim down to the level of Hong Kong. And that's what we have here today. Canadians don't realize it. You can't run for a nomination for a major party unless you're pre-approved. And both the Liberals and NDP now say you can't run if you're a white male unless you declare yourself as gay. So, and you can't run as a Conservative because they got their nominations rigged. And the Premier's nephew gets the nomination. You can't have it. So tell me that's a democracy. It's not. At least in Hong Kong, they know it's a joke. Here, we think we have a democracy. We have less rights than they do in Hong Kong.
So you're saying that the reason why we don't have a democracy is because the political parties control who can run for the nominations.
They control everything. They control the nominations. They control the cabinet. They control the executive. But it isn't the parties. It's the prime minister's office or the leader's office controls everything top to bottom. If you vote against your party one time, you're out of the caucus. When you get elected, you go to a meeting with the whip and he tells you two things. First, you go raise $500,000 in the next 4 years. Second, if you vote against us in 4 years or do anything against us, you won't have this meeting with us after you get reelected in 4 years. Now get out of my office. Come on, tell me it's not true. It's true. We have less rights here in Canada than you do in Hong Kong. That's not what the Charter of Rights says.
We have less rights than you do in Hong Kong, a communist country. Greg, come on.
Show me how that you have more rights in Canada. Show me. All the party candidates are picked in Hong Kong. They're all picked here. All the rules and regulations, all the laws are passed by the legislature. All the regulators, the chief electoral officer is all passed by the legislature. You needed 2/3 majority in Ontario to get rid of the chief electoral officer, even for cause. He could commit a criminal offense, you can't get rid of him. You can't get rid of the person you appoint to rig the rules to protect you. Canada signed the United States Declaration on Human Rights in 1960. That says you can't discriminate against people based on their political thought, belief, and expression. The Charter says the same thing. But my candidates get arrested at the local school when they ask to debate. That's what they do in Russia. That's what they do in Hong Kong. That's what they do in China. That's what we do in Canada. We're not a democracy. We're a kleptocracy where the rich control everything and screw the poor. If we were a democracy, a debtor in possession that lent a company 50 million wouldn't have all the assets of the company and take control of the pensions. They wouldn't be first. The bankers wouldn't be first. When you signed a contract with a real estate agent to purchase a property, he wouldn't be able to raise the price $200,000. Oh, but we got a conservative who says, I'll fix that. Just reelect me and I'll fix that. But he won't fix it. because his campaign contributors are the thieves. Let's talk about liberals.
Okay, hold it. We're chatting tonight with Greg Vezina, the leader of the None of the Above party. We're going to take a break, let him calm down, and we're going to listen to some messages and come back in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on 2nd and 60. We're chatting tonight with Greg Vezina. He is the leader of the None of the Above party, which is a party, surprise, surprise, that is running in the provincial elections coming up on, is it June the 2nd?
June 2nd. None of the Above Direct Democracy Party is our legal name.
None of the Above Direct Democracy Party. So direct democracy, I understand that your lingo or your tagline is the 3 R's. Tell me what the 3 R's are that you stand by.
Referendum, recall, and real accountability.
Okay.
Real transparency. The things that every politician promises before he gets elected that they won't do after. For example, freedom of information, transparency, all that kind of stuff. You know, like the Liberals were in power and they're criticized by the Conservatives because they used government money for partisan ads during elections. And so they said, okay, we'll stop doing that. And we'll have the Auditor General approve. Okay, great. And then they said, okay, we're going to lower political contributions and corporate contributions, and we're going to control campaign spending. Oh, okay, we'll do that. And the Conservatives criticize them, the NDP. So the Conservatives got a majority. So what do? Well, they eliminate the rule on advertising, government advertising during campaigns. They do exactly what they criticize the Liberals for doing. And what do? They increase the political contributions from $1,200 to $3,000 for each part. So instead of a $3,000 limit, now you got a $9,000 campaign limit. So like no politician you elect will pass a law giving the public a say. They will not do it. It's an antithesis to their very existence. They believe that you are too stupid to make any decisions yourself and that you need to have them made for you. And it doesn't matter whether you're a conservative or a Tory, or as I like to say, the only good Tory is a suppository, John Tory accepted, or whether you're one of those, what we would call the lion liberals, because, you know, if you're a liberal, the largest contributor to your party for 10 years is a green energy alcohol fuel companies who gives you 400 grand and gets 165 million in public money. Or if you're an NDP, because then if you're in power, all the policies you pass have to pass the muster with your union supporters. And you won't do what you said you'd do either. So why do we keep electing people that keep promising to do better, that do worse, and we just keep doing it over and over? And what's even worse than that now is that now we let them get away with eliminating any way to get them out of office. You can't even get rid of them anymore. So something wrong,
Brian, by not electing them at the next election.
You can't. You get one or the other. You get red or blue. You get red or blue or red or blue or red or blue. You're not allowed to have another flavor. In fact, you're not even allowed on the public airwaves to hear or see another flavor. The Broadcast Act says equitable coverage. So during the campaign, the broadcasters will put one 30-second TV story on about the rhinoceroses are running, these other guys, and the rhinoceros. But they'll give 1,000 minutes to the major parties, their leaders and candidates. And that's equitable. Everything for these guys and virtually nothing for these guys. And our journalists do the same thing. Our ethical journalists that Prime Minister Trudeau gives $600 million a year to. And he says, oh, anybody that disagrees with me is a fringe lunatic. He's a terrorist. And if you media report him, I won't give you government money. That's the Charter of Rights, boys and girls. That's what we have in Canada. Less rights than you have in Hong Kong.
Okay, so you're saying that there's got to be some way of disciplining politicians, and this is, I presume, the recall, the recall R. Tell me about the recall that you want to have.
Yeah, I actually wrote a book, Democracy on this, with John Deverell from the Toronto Star in 1993. It's available on the website NOTA.ca. You can read it free. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I was against recall. I felt that if you had recall, what would happen when you have a close election and a government had a 3-seat majority or a 3-seat minority, it was a majority of the opposition would find the 3 weakest government members and start a recall the day after the election. And I also felt that if the government was 3 seats short of majority, they would find the 3 weakest opposition members and recall them. So I felt that you would have nothing but gamesmanship. But then back then, I believed that political parties would keep their promises and do all that other stuff. So now they're not going to do it. So what can I say? They don't do it. They don't keep their promises.
So how does recall? How does recall
I'm in
work?
favor of recall.
How does it work?
Because BC passed a recall law. In one case, they got enough signatures to start the process. The MLA resigned. In 2 other cases, they just announced the recall and the member resigned. So what I've now realized is what recall does is allows you to get the broom out and sweep out the barn. And that's what we need to do. We need to sweep the excrement out of the barn.
Okay, so tell me, so how would the law work on recall?
Well, Mike Harris passed, BC has one. If a third or 25% of the people that voted in that riding in the last election signed a recall petition, bang, we have a recall vote and you vote on it. And you either win or you lose.
So the average riding is about 100,000 people. We get about a 50 to 60% turnout. So 50 to 60,000 people. So you're talking about having to get 12 to 15,000 people to sign a petition.
Yes, a substantial number, a very substantial number so that it isn't abused. But in the US, it's 3%. They've recalled a governor in California. They threw out Davis and they almost threw out the existing one recently. They tried to throw out the mayor of Cleveland, Dennis Kucinich, years ago, and out of 400,000 votes, he saved his job by 204 votes. So if America can have recall and referendum and democracy, and they can control their politicians somewhat, why can't we? Oh, because Canada is a better democracy. No, Canada is a better dictatorship.
Come on, Greg. Dictatorship?
True. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
Tell me you have more rights in Canada than you have in Hong Kong.
You have more rights in Canada than you have in Hong Kong.
Okay, we have 23 candidates parties on the ballot here. Watch the news. Not 3 parties, not 4 parties. Like in Hong Kong.
We have 23 parties.
23 parties running candidates. There were more candidates for the other parties than the 4 major parties in the last election.
Okay, but did any of them win?
Listen, if you don't know they exist, how can they win? We did research on polling. The CBC pollster did. If you name a party in the polls, they get 4% of the vote, 3.9% of the vote automatically just by naming them. If you don't name them, they get 0.9. You need 2% of the vote to get a campaign subsidy. So we just won't name them and they don't get subsidies and they don't exist. Oh, and people go on the ballot and they see there's 23 parties. I've never heard any of these. But I pay $1 billion a year for the CBC to tell me. I let CTV use the public airwaves. I spent $120 million for Steve Paikin, and he hasn't mentioned the word none of the above on his station in 3 elections. And that's equitable coverage. And he's a journalist, so that means fulsome and educational. Absolutely nothing, not a word. Now tell me we're not the same as Hong Kong. We are. It's bullshit.
You can't say that on the public airways.
Yes, I can.
You just did, I guess.
That's why I'm passionate, Brian. I love my country. I love the Charter of Rights. I disagreed with some of the things that Mr. Trudeau Sr. did, but I think he made some changes in this country that were absolutely incredible and wonderful. I agree with his policy on multiculturalism. I agree with the immigration policy. I agree with the Charter of Rights. I agree with the fairness. I agree with the equality. But you can't take all that and then beat people over the head with it. We have equality, but you're a white man. You can't have a job. You can't be a candidate. You can't speak at the local school.
Okay,
That's
no,
not
hold it. You can't be a candidate. So what you're saying is that the green light commissions or whatever they're called for the different parties are what, doing affirmative action for?
Yeah, they published this as policy. The BC NDP in the last election and the BC, Ontario NDP and the Liberals, as far as I know, they haven't published it, but it's their policy. If you're not a white incumbent, you can't run. If you're white and you're not an incumbent white man, you cannot run unless you declare you are an asterisk. So the mayor of Inverness, BC, had to inform his wife and his 1-year-old child that he was bisexual. And he then was qualified to win the NDP nomination, and he won his seat. I don't care who you go to bed with. It's nobody's business, and it shouldn't be a qualification to run for office.
So the counterpoint obviously is that too many of the seats have been held by white middle-aged males for way too long, and they're having they've got affirmative action to try to get other people involved. Is there something wrong with affirmative action?
So then the Sikhs join the riding association and start electing Sikh members, and then they outlaw them because the Sikhs are taking over the party, which is exactly what the Liberals did. Or the pro-lifers join, and then they outlaw them. So look, at these people only believe in democracy when it's their little democracy. When it's anybody else's, oh no, we can't have that. Tell me I'm wrong. I'm not. How do they do it in Hong Kong?
So we've talked
just like that.
We've talked recall. We've talked representation to a certain extent. Tell me about
responsible government.
Real responsible government.
Yeah. Responsible government means, again, we have accountability, that you don't hide stuff from the parliamentary budget officer, that the conflict of interest legislation has teeth. Justin Trudeau is the only prime minister that's ever, and the finance minister, his finance minister, are the only people ever been found guilty of that. And what's the consequence? Nothing. So, look, the sword of Damocles is supposed to be this 10,000-ton, dagger that's sitting above the throne, and it's held by a thin hair. And whoever's on the throne had better be careful about democracies, because it'll land on them. But the hair of democracies in Canada is an ocean freighter boat anchor chain. The sword of democracies wouldn't fall on you in Canada, no matter what you did. You can violate the charter, hold us bullets.
Well, is it right? We've got a minority government because people disagreed with what enough people disagreed with what Justin Trudeau was doing, that he didn't get the majority that he was looking for. Aaron O'Toole was kicked out as a leader by effectively a recall from his caucus. The Liberal Party and provincially went from a majority to, what was it, 6 seats or something like that, because of incredible opposition to what the former premier in Ontario was doing. So, Patrick Brown was unseated from his post as leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in Ontario, 2 months before the election? Isn't that recall?
There are 9 other provinces in Canada and 3 territories, or 3 territories that are not Ontario. So let's just talk about the rest of the country. In Quebec, a new party that didn't exist 8 years ago, 4 years ago, won a majority government. In Atlantic Canada, the Atlantic Party that didn't exist 4 years ago holds the balance of power and decides who gets to be the government. But in Ontario, if you're not one of the major parties, it is illegal for you to speak during our elections.
It is illegal for you to speak?
Yeah. I got arrested. I got arrested at the school where my child went to school, where I was the candidate, and I wanted to go down to the debate. And I was arrested for asking to speak. And our candidate in Guelph was arrested. And our candidate in Ottawa Senate was arrested. Just like in Hong Kong, just like in Russia. So tell me I'm wrong. You can't, because I've proven I'm right.
Okay,
I went to court with the chief electoral officer over him letting the chambers of commerce violate the spending rules by holding debates.
If the system is the same
in campaign expense,
Quebec and Ontario and Atlantic Canada and Saskatchewan, and you can get Atlantic parties and Saskatchewan parties and the whatever the CAC party is called. The proof is that new parties can come about. And you and I have talked previously about how the president of France came from nowhere and up the middle created a new centrist party.
Yeah, but that was only because their system was he was one of the last two on the ballot and he was running against Le Pen. So you had to choose between this idiot or that racist. So no, please, no, that's not a good example. And the Saskatchewan party was a conservative party where the premier resigned and 12 of his cabinet ministers went to prison for fraud and corruption. So that isn't a new party either. No, please, wake up.
We're chatting with Greg Vezina tonight, the leader of the None of the Above party. We're going to take a break for some messages, let him calm down a second time, and come back with him in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour in 2nd and 60. Well, I'm having a good time tonight chatting with Greg Vezina, the leader of the None of the Above party. We're talking about his party, the None of the Above party, which is one of, I think you said 22 different parties that are running in the upcoming provincial election on June the 2nd. And he's got a interesting policy that is 3 R's: representation, recall, and democracy, representative democracy, recall, and real accountability. Greg, let's go back and have a little bit of a chat about representation. So, there's a lot of different structures that people have talked about. You've been talking a little bit about proportional representation. And you're saying that something like, I think you said 90 different countries have proportional representation. We keep on hearing Israel and Italy and other countries, take forever to form a coalition government, and they spend as much time trying to put governments together as they do in the actual governing of the country. And then, we've heard this preferential or priority voting that there's a bunch of people that are in Toronto that are supporting, in the United States that are supporting. And then we heard this mixed member proportional or something like this. Tell me about the different structures and which one you support and why.
Okay. First off, just to correct you, Brian, the party's founded on the 3 R's of direct democracy: referendum, recall, and real representative reforms and accountability. As far as the way we elect people, the None of the Above party is a process-based party. We have no policies. I don't have a policy on the GST, the HST, guaranteed annual income, or anything else. That's up to the public. We believe that the policies that the vast majority of the public support should be enacted. And we don't believe the present system allows that. And I personally don't believe changing from the first past the post system to a worse one, transferable vote, which Trudeau and the new Ontario Liberal leader like, because they guarantee Liberals power, or proportional representation, even a reasonable form like in most countries, not the two you picked out, Israel, Italy, but all the others that people don't want to insult or put down, PR pick. They have a 5% threshold minimum to get in the legislature. So you don't have a bunch of wingnuts running the show. But I don't believe it matters, Brian, how we elect representatives, because I don't think they'll represent us. I don't think they ever did, really. Maybe up until the 50s and 60s, when there was no party names on the ballot, when you actually knew the person that was running in your riding, and when anybody could run, and you didn't have to be pre-approved as a special interest or special flavor or rich or whatever candidate. But those days are long, long, long gone. So I really don't think it matters. I think mixed membered proportional, done without the way Dalton McGuinty scared you, which is half the ridings elect an individual and the other half are filled with a party list, but only the candidates that got the very highest percentage of the vote get those seats. That, to me, would be the best system, but I don't care. If we had referendum, we could use it to force another referendum, and not one where the premier says, I'm going to campaign in favor of it, and then when he has it, campaigns against it and tells you got to double the number of MPs from 125 to 250, which was total BS. So the short answer is, I don't think it matters how you elect people if they're not going to represent them.
Okay, so referendum is the key, and that's how you discipline people to make sure that they vote the way you want. But let's
And
stay
recall.
on let's stay on
And
the
recall.
and recall. Let's stay on the structures just for one more second.
Yep.
Justin Trudeau, 6 years ago, did say that this would be the last election held under the first past the post, and he said that. I think someone quoted him 1,000 or more times during the the election campaign or before the election was held, and didn't institute it. Wouldn't that have been a major change if you had put in something different?
Oh, yes.
Was past the post?
No, and I think part of the reason that we're now getting Canadians are getting more extreme is partially because he did not do that. If you take a voice in society and you suppress it and you don't let it be heard, it's going to go find a way to be heard. And the mistake that these people are making by suppressing these parties is they're going to make them more powerful than they need to be. The People's Party is at 10% of the vote right now. So no conservative will ever form a government again. It's impossible. They need 40% of the vote.
Well, unless Pierre Poilievre is able to appeal to all those PCP voters, which would appear that that's his strategy right now.
Let me finish, please. No, a liberal is not going to appeal to the far right wing, and a right winger is not going to appeal to the middle. So if the Conservatives elect Charest, they lose the right. If they elect Poilievre, they lose the middle. There's no way when they got, and they lose it because if they elect the guy on the right, he's going after the People's Party vote. Same thing in Ontario. You got the Blue Party, the New Blue Party. They already got candidates in 118 ridings. And the Conservatives have already started announcing they're only going on the cable debates with the Chamber of Commerce. They're not going on any other debates, so they don't have to debate the Blue Party. They're going to give the Blue Party 10% of the vote. And then the Conservatives, instead of getting 39, are going to get 30. The Liberals are going to get 20, the NDP 30, and we're going to have an NDP government. I guarantee it.
Because of the splits with the Blue Party and the Ontario Party.
If Doug Ford does not win a majority, he is gone. If the NDP wins more seats than the Liberals got to sign an accord with the NDP. Both Horvath and Del Duca have said they will not let Ford govern with a minority. You think Del Duca is going to prop up Ford?
No, not a chance.
Okay. So why is the Blue Party's at 5% in the polls and they're not even in the polls? The pollsters don't even say their name. They're going to get 10% of the vote.
And so who's the Blue Party?
He's running a front runner campaign and his candidates are hiding from the opposition, and voters in Ontario and Canada don't like that.
Okay, but the Blue Party is you're saying a right-wing PCP type party. So this is effectively like proportional representation. It's good.
No, because they don't win any seats. What's proportional? In a PR system, you get 10% of the votes, you get 10% of the seats. Here, you get 10% of the votes, you get no seats.
So you're saying all they're doing is taking seats away from the Conservatives.
They're going to make sure the Conservatives are defeated. And that is his goal, so that the new right-wing party can split up the Conservative Party, and then the red Tories can go and join the Liberals. That's the goal.
Okay, so the first past the post system doesn't work. Proportional representation, you're saying there's some weaknesses. You like this mixed member proportional.
There are various ways you can put together a PR system. One of the problems with what they call alternative vote, where you have 5 or 6 members in a riding, and they do it proportionally, is Canada's too big a country for that. You'd have ridings in Northern Ontario that are stretched from Thunder Bay all the way to Ottawa. So, you've got to go down. We still have to have some geographical representation that's where you're representing an area or locality, a culture, a community. You can't have a riding that's 500 miles wide. I mean, we've got a couple of them up north that are that wide already.
Yeah, well, you do. No question. Okay, so let's come back to referendum then. I was in Switzerland a couple of years ago. My son went to school there, and he showed me the booklet. It's massive.
Yes. Here's what happens there.
How many people will read through all of those different, ballot questions and actually be informed and vote on them?
Huge numbers do, as much as 50%. It's unbelievable. Here's how it works. the politicians go and do what politicians do. And they pass all these laws about it. And then you get to vote the book. And then you get to go, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And you send it off. And the people decide. And then the last 10 pages, you get to write down the top 10 things that piss me off. The top 10 things I want a referendum on. And when you get the next book, there are the top 10 things you want to vote it on. So they asked over there for 10 years for a vote on a guaranteed annual income, and the politicians wouldn't do it. So they put it in the book, and they had one in 6 months. It lost. I rest my case.
So you're saying that we would get a book every 4 years?
No, every year.
Every year. So we got an election every year.
Everything they pass, we get to ratify.
And we get this massive book that's got what, summaries of the bills, or just statements of the bills, or the whole bill?
Yeah, a link. You want to go read the bill? Fine. Here's what it's about. Boom.
And you think enough Canadians to actually make a difference are going to sit there and read through that booklet and vote on whether they agree with gay rights, capital punishment, funding the CBC, whatever it is?
In the first place, remember, we have a Charter of Rights. So you can't vote on anything that takes away a charter right. Second, we have a qualification process before you can have a referendum on a question. And for example, we proposed you have 200, an automatic vote is different, but we proposed you have 200 initial sponsors to go to the Attorney General. And then he tells you whether the bill meets the charter challenge or common law challenge. And then the government can say, you know what? We're going to introduce a bill that goes part way. If we can get 100 of your original 200 sponsors to sign off, the referendum's dead for one term, and we'll pass a bill part way. I do believe that if we had control of our politicians, that they would do the right thing. And Brian, you know, I've known many of these people for 30, 40 years. I do believe that they want to do the right thing. But the problem is they get elected. And then they get to go to that meeting with the party whip. And it's all over. And you know, guys, some of the best politicians that have ever lived, Dennis Mills. Why was he never in cabinet? Because he was an ideas guy.
He spoke his mind.
Okay. So why is it that we can't put the brightest minds from all the parties into a cabinet of national unity and pass all the bills on the things that we agree on? Then we'll fire them all and go back to fighting with each other. You don't have to change the Constitution to do that.
Okay, so referendum, recall, and real accountability. And this real accountability is created by the referendum and the recall.
Well, it's also legislative and it's also administrative, right? So openness, transparency, you know, funding charter challenges, appeals to court, you know, parliamentary budget officer, you know, all these things. When you violate the conflict of interest legislation, there's a penalty. When you do something, there's a penalty. We have no recall of civil servants. Do you know how hard it is to get rid of a civil servant? Try and get rid of a bad judge. Can't do it. Try and get rid of a bad university professor. They have tenure. Can't do it. In my world, if one of those people got recalled by 75%, not 50, they lose their job, they lose their pension, and they end up homeless, just like the people that they've been doing it to.
So judges, university professors, civil servants
everybody
are all subject to recall.
If you're a public official, you can be recalled. Higher standard for judges than politicians. Even though I think in many cases, judges are lower standard than politicians because they're immune.
Okay, so, you know, what's your chance, Greg? Like
zero, absolutely zero. All I want to have happen is what I accomplished with Mike Harris. I want Mike ran around this province for a year. I helped write the Common Sense Revolution. I wrote the part about keeping our promises and passing a referendum bill. Mike Harris ran around this province for a year before the election saying nothing but that. And he won a big majority on it. But once he won the majority, he didn't care anymore. Okay. He drafted a bill at committee. It had unanimous consent. But then he and a guy named Bob Ray and a woman named Lynn McLeod, the three-party leaders, got to have a say. And they went and had lunch and they said, fuck Vezina, we're not passing Vezina's bill. Is he crazy? And Mike said, okay, I'll take care of him. And what did he do? He passed political tax credits being refundable. Because in 1990, he said that discriminated against the poor. And then he became premier, and it took him from 1995 to 2000 to pass that one. So look, I've known these guys for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They get elected to do something. They get there. They won't do it. They can't do it. They're not allowed to do it. And they sell us all out.
So you don't think that none of the above party is actually going to elected, but what you want to do is get your agenda on the topic being discussed.
Well, it also depends on star candidates. We have a couple of star candidates that are looking at running. We had a couple of previously where we did polls for them, and they polled second. So it is quite possible we will have a star candidate or two, and they can win. There's no question that a star candidate can win. And the fact that we're going to get a court decision from the Ontario court in the next week that will no longer arrest candidates at the local school, or we will arrest candidates at the local school, is going to be international news. We've asked the UN to come in and monitor the Ontario election. So if democracy in the Ukraine is worth fighting for, there might be a few Ukrainians in Canada that think it's worth fighting for here. You never know who we're going to get. We might even have an ex-Ontario MPP or two on the ballot. So no, I wouldn't say that we have no chance. I'd say we have two chances, slim and none.
We're chatting today with Greg Vezina. He's the leader of the None of the Above party that's running on a referendum recall and responsible government. It's an interesting agenda. We're going to take a break for some messages, and I'm going to come back and give you my own cut on some of Greg's ideas in just a minute. Stay with us for 2 minutes, and I'll be back.
On the air, though, eh?
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So Greg Vezina, the leader of the None of the Above party, has been talking tonight about some of the problems with our democracy in Canada and how he and the None of the Above party want to change it with referendum laws, recall laws, and real accountability for our elected politicians, our civil service, our judges, our judiciary, et cetera. And I wanted to make a few comments if I could. I have long been a person who thinks that the nomination process in our different ridings is flawed, and different groups, whether they be ethnic or sports or whatever, business, one issue oriented, whether that be pro-life or the opposite, take control of different riding associations and control the nomination process. And I think that's wrong. And I do think the primary system in the United States, where everyone gets to run and whoever wins in that primary gets to run in the election. And, in some places and in Canada, you would see it in Alberta, rural Alberta, for an example, or rural Ontario, the primary would be more important than the general election, just as it is in the United States, where a Republican primary in a southern state or a Democratic primary in New York and California are more important than the general election. And I think that's good, because that's what it should be. It should be a very competitive, open, transparent process to earn that nomination. And I do think that the green light committees, or whatever they're called in the different political parties, I think there's 30 people under 30 that are running for the Liberal Party in this upcoming election. That's affirmative action that's gone too far, I firmly believe. And I think it should be far more up to the elector, how those people get elected. And so that's number one. I do think that Greg is right that the nomination process is flawed and needs to be changed. Number two, I do think that our structure of electing people on the first by the post is wrong. And we wouldn't do that in almost anything else. We wouldn't do it in corporate law, where if you had a couple of different options and one just got 32% or 39%, you'd go with that. No, you would probably need 50.1, and in a lot of cases you need 66% to pass something. And it wouldn't happen in our election of leaders. We don't elect our leaders of the political parties by whoever got the most votes on the first ballot wins. No, we would have successive ballots and make you get 50.1%. And you think about the Quebec referendum on staying in Canada or not, there were different options. There was an option to stay in Canada, Sovereignty Association, and to leave. Now, and we didn't allow three different options and have first by the post. We made sure it was yes or no, and you had to get the 50.1. And so, why we stick with the first past the post in elected policies, politics is beyond me. And I think Greg's right. It's only because it benefits the major political parties. And I think that this current trend toward, whether you called it preferential or priority voting, is similarly flawed, because it would on average always benefit either the incumbent or one of the two major parties, because that would be where you would go to on the second or third ballot. And so I do like proportional representation. And I don't mind the fact that the political parties have got to negotiate into coalitions. I do agree with Greg's point that, maybe some mixed member process is better than pure proportional representation, so that you do get some geographical representation. That said, in the vast majority of suburban and urban Canada, it probably doesn't matter. So maybe that mixed member only has to, really happen in less urban environments. There's 6 ridings, for an example, in Mississauga. You could easily have 3 people elected for Mississauga and 3 people elected by proportional representation. And there's, I think, 26 or something like that in Toronto. You don't need 26 different MPs. And I firmly believe the vast majority of people in Toronto don't even know who their local MP is, and whether they're living in Etobicoke Centre, Etobicoke Lakeshore, or Etobicoke North. And so I think that those boundaries become a lot less important in urban and suburban areas than they may be in more rural areas. I'm very intrigued by the recall idea that Greg talks about, and I do think, and this last recall election in California was really interesting, and it was interesting that it failed, but that people spent so much money and so much effort, and actually, to my mind, having that recall, which was, I believe, Greg, at a sort of an off regular time period, so that it got a lot more attention than it would have if it was just on, the first Tuesday in November, when the regular elections occur in the United States. People really paid attention to it. And to fire someone, which is what a recall is all about, really takes a huge amount of thought and effort, rather than sort of electing one of several choices. And the fact that, and I think the way the recall legislation in the United States works is if someone gets recalled and someone else gets very high in the vote, they automatically take the spot. Makes it really quite threatening and quite impactful. And so I like the recall idea that Greg talks about. I interviewed another guy recently who thought that democracy was dying in Canada and in the Western world, and has come up with an app that allows you to vote through sort of like the referendum that Greg's talking about, but more almost like a poll on your smartphone. As I said, I was in Switzerland during a referendum time period when my son was living in Switzerland, going to school, and it works, and it works well, and people really do, pay attention and go through the issues. And my last point I want to make is I think Greg is right that whether it be by way of referendum or by way of proportional representation, I think that the last year has really taught us something. The truck convoy, I disagreed with. It was, I think, a mistake. And I do think they occupied Ottawa and was inappropriate. But I had a fascinating conversation with John Wright about a big poll. He's an important pollster in Canada. He said, Brian, there's 15% of Canadians, maybe 10, but between 10 and 15% of Canadians that supported the truck convoy, that were anti-vax and were anti-mask, and no one was listening to them. And they deserve to be listened to. And while I disagree with them and thought that they were wrong, I think the fact that no one was listening to them, actually, as Greg said, added fuel to the fire, and fanned the flames of that fire. And if there was a referendum and 85% of the people voted against them, that would sort of have put it to bed. If there was, a Maxime Bernier, PCP, elected 1 or 2 or 10 members of parliament, and they were drowned out, and they put forward positions and no one agreed with them, they'd sort of have their issue put to bed. But when you're never heard, you're never listened to, your ideas are never allowed to be debated among sort of regular society, you set up camp on Wellington Street in downtown Ottawa. And so I do think that everyone deserves to have their voice heard. You don't have to, I don't think you have a right to have it blared through a horn at 2:00 in the morning or via megaphone, but you do have the right to hear your voice heard. So I like some of the things that Greg Vezina is talking about. I like the idea about referendum. I like the idea about recall. I love the idea about ensuring that people do their job right, and we have real accountability. So I think that while Greg and the None of the Above party probably don't have a chance to win many votes and many seats, he deserves to be heard. And so I hope that that the different organizations that are putting on debates allow him and his candidates to speak. Anyway, Greg, that's my cut on your ideas.
Brian, you agree with a bunch of things I said. What's wrong with you? Have you
I know
got
this is
long
bad
COVID?
news.
Did you hurt yourself? The freedom of speech that needs to be protected is not the speech you want to hear. The freedom of speech you need to protect is the speech you don't want to hear, that you might not agree with. And the reason is because you might change your mind. You might be enlightened. You might be educated. And as long as you don't have a chance to hear new ideas and new candidates and new policies, then we're going to continue with follow the leader to the slaughterhouse politics. There's only one way to change it, and that is for us to get 5 to 10% of the vote. And then the first law of politics applies, because the backroom pollsters and the backroom people in the party will say, as they're going to tell Doug, we're dead. We let them get so big that they ate our lunch. And that's all we need to do, Brian, is have one of the major parties again pick up our policy and this time do it. And remember, there's been 4 provinces in Canada that have had referendums. 2 of them, they voted in favor of it, and then the politicians refused to do it. And in the last Quebec, on proportional representation, the last Quebec election, all the parties promised to do proportional representation, but now they got a majority. So the bottom line is, if enough people protest vote, the major parties will see the train, and then they'll take our policies and they'll adopt them. And the history of these things around the world is, the first time they lie, they get defeated. The next guys promise, they lie, they get defeated. The first guys re-promise, they get elected, they pass. It usually takes 3 lies to get a politician to keep a promise.
Greg Vezina, leader of the None of the Above party. Thanks for joining us, stimulating conversation. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Good night.